We're so happy that you're joining us today. It is my pleasure to introduce our guests, Rusty Lowe and Theresa Schwerin. Rusty is a climate scientist and educator at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, also known as IGES, who works at the forefront of citizen science and its application for mosquito-borne diseases such as Zika, West Nile virus, and dengue. She is the science lead for the Globe Mosquito Habitat Mapper and Globe Mission Mosquito. Using a free mobile app, citizen scientists of all ages and community health professionals can work together with NASA scientists to reduce the outbreak of mosquito-borne disease in their community. And Theresa Schwerin is the IGES Vice President for Education Programs. She leads the NASA Earth Science Education Collaborative, which is a partnership between IGES and the Earth Sciences at 3 NASA centers: Goddard Space Flight Center, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and Langley Research Center, which I think is awesome. And NESEC provides opportunities for lifelong learners to participate in NASA Earth Science. And Theresa has an MLIS, which is a Master of Library and Information Science, and she helps foster innovative collaborations to bring Earth observations to formal and informal education, and is working with libraries to engage their communities in citizen science. So I am so excited to present these 2 speakers. In today's Health Bites, they will give a presentation on connecting climate change, mosquitoes, and community health. Thank you, Rusty and Theresa, for being our guest speakers this morning, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Debbie, and so glad to be here this morning. And as Debbie mentioned, this project is part of the NASA Earth Science Education Collaborative, which is part of a bigger NASA program called Science Activation, which engages the public throughout their lifetimes to contribute to NASA science and the advancement of knowledge. And if you go to the next slide, the topics that we're going to the poll questions. Okay, so we have 3 poll questions. The first is, does it seem that mosquitoes are arriving earlier in the spring and leaving later in the fall than you remember? And you can answer poll number 1, question number 1. And Edward, let me know when that question is closed. And we see 81% are saying yes, and 19% are saying no. And would you like to go to the next question, Edward? Poll question 2, do mosquito bites seem to hurt you more now than they did in the past? And interesting, we're seeing about 85% saying no and 15% saying yes. And question number 3, who is responsible for mosquito control in your community? And if you're having trouble with the poll, there are polls at the bottom of the screen is where you can access that to answer the question. And no worries if you can't see the poll button, sorry about that. So we're seeing between individuals and local government, public health and mosquito control are the top, followed by private companies and combination of all of the above. So why don't we go to the next slide and get into our presentation. So some of the topics that we're going to cover, we're going to talk about why is NASA interested in mosquitoes? Citizen science using a free Globe Observer mobile app. What are some of the research and application connections? How you can access this data, some examples of library programming and resources that are available to you, and then resource list and links that we think will be helpful. So Rusty, I'm going to turn it over to you. We'll go to the next slide.
Okay, well, first I wanted to tell a story about climate change and tell my story. And my story is that as a researcher in climate change and teaching climate change, I've been working for the better part of a couple decades, wrestling with the idea of how to get people to really understand the critical importance of this topic and taking action. And I began to realize that when you communicate about climate change, it really has to hit how people are feeling. So the message has to be locally important. It needs to be focused on the present. It needs to be personally relatable. So it's really easy to communicate about climate change if you are talking to people who are living in permafrost that's melting and their houses are sinking, or if you're in the bayou in Louisiana and the land is being submerged. Right. But for most people, climate change is something abstract. It seems like it's far away in the future. So we tried to think, how can, what's something that can communicate for all of us? And then I sort of thought, wow, mosquitoes are everywhere and they can be sort of like the buzzy nuisance reminders of climate change. So here we are, mosquito avatars of climate change. And they tell us about climate, they buzz and bite. And in this way, they communicate. The mosquito season is getting longer in many regions of the world. This map below shows just a little piece of the many different species that have moved from different continents and have become invasive in new areas. And this is important because many of the invasive mosquitoes are also mosquitoes that are capable of transmitting pathogens that cause disease. And one of the reasons why NASA is so interested in this topic is that mosquito-borne disease is one of the leading causes of illness and death among humans, about 300 million cases of disease every year. And so it is a really, really important point. So the first poll that we had was asked about, have you seen climate change have you seen have you seen changes in the mosquito season locally? So let's go to the next slide. And what you'll see is if you look at your own state, now we have the site that you can see that is linked below. They have many more cities located that you can take a look at, but I just chose one place in each of the region states here. And you can see that we do have a lot of variability. For instance, in places like Honolulu, which is not on this list, there's been no change because they're in the tropics. And so the mosquito problem is the mosquito problem. It's going to stay the same. But in places like Nevada, we have almost 7 weeks longer of a mosquito season. And so that's pretty remarkable. And that is a response of climate change. And for the states in District 3, it varies quite a bit, but it's around 2 weeks longer. So if you answer that the season is longer than it was before, you are in fact probably correct for where you live. So I also have to mention this is since 1970. So this is pretty recent change. It's within our lifetimes. Okay, great. Next one, please. The other question that we asked in the poll is, do you actually experience bites that seem to be like bite harder or it hurts more? And if you said, this is a question that you can't be right or wrong because it's your own personal experience, but some of you have said, and could you show that poll again, please, Edward? Yeah. So most people said no. Some people said yes. So 14% say that the mosquitoes seem to bite harder. But for those of you who think that's true, it probably is true in your case, because if you look at this map, and I'm sorry it's so small, but if you look at the region where you live, which is Region 3, what you'll see is you're in an area of habitat suitability for 2 nasty invasive mosquitoes. This is the yellow fever mosquito and the Asian tiger mosquito, Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus. Both of these are really dangerous mosquitoes because they carry diseases like dengue, Zika, yellow fever, and chikungunya, among others. Their bites are more irritating because, unlike our homegrown domesticates, they're not domesticated, but our homegrown domestic species, they tend to bite more than once in one place. And so it is more irritating and the bites tend to hurt more. So if you said no, you just haven't been bitten by an Aedes albopictus or an Aedes aegypti yet. Great. So this is a big change in our lifetime about where and when mosquitoes are found. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so people always ask me, this is a NASA app, and people say, can NASA really see mosquitoes from space? They're so doggone small. And no, they can't see mosquitoes from space, but NASA's Earth observation system is sensing different environmental parameters, and they actually can identify the precipitation and temperature and humidity and these kinds of attributes that create a favorable habitat for a mosquito population to explode. So these data are used by scientists to predict when and where populations will explode and where you can potentially have outbreaks of mosquito-borne disease. So, but because we can't see mosquitoes from space, and this is the next slide, please, we have a ground-based observation system composed of citizen scientists. And we provide an app. It's called the Globe Observer. It has several tools on this platform. And basically, by collecting data about where you find mosquitoes and when you find mosquitoes and in what kind of context you find mosquitoes, you are contributing to the understanding of the data that's being collected from space. So scientists are really making that connection between satellite data and mosquitoes. And I'm really hoping that after this presentation, you might want to download this app, maybe share it with your patrons, because it is a really pretty exciting way to get involved in not only NASA science, but also in critical action to protect your community from disease. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So this is the kind of slide we are always told not to give you because you can't read the whole thing. But I just want you to kind of get the gestalt that there are all these different things, these gray boxes here. These are the different kinds of things that sensors in space in NASA's Earth observing system that they are sensing. And all those things are environmental factors that mosquitoes respond to and create mosquito habitats. And those habitats are found in places on the landscape. And so using this app, those two things in yellow circles are things that we can actually verify, and then we can connect up to that data from satellite observations to make those models. So I'm just trying to show you here how scientists use your data in kind of a very abstract and possibly not so useful way. Okay, next one, please. So anyway, when people use the app, we actually are asking people please to use both the mosquito habitat mapper and land cover and take coincident observations. So make some mosquito habitat observations and then use the land cover tool and take some pictures up, down, north, south, east, west to describe the land cover. And you'll see that there are two other tools on this platform. There's a clouds tool and a trees tool, and these are also very valuable data. But right now we have scientists that are specifically requesting, mosquito scientists that are specifically requesting data from the two tools that I'm talking about today. So it would take another talk to talk about the other tools. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And next one, please. Okay. So you know, there is another reason that this app is really important. And so I've just talked about the reason why scientists are interested in this data, but also there is a public health piece to this using this app, which we built in intentionally because, you know, we already talked about how important these mosquito-borne diseases are to the health of the globe, right? And for most mosquito-borne diseases, we don't have vaccines yet. And so we have to have behavioral strategies to protect communities from vector-borne disease. And the three things that we can do is to do surveillance, you know, find places that are mosquito habitats and get rid of those larvae before they occur. You can also do mitigation, where we actually dump out water. We might spray a community. These are ways that we can do this as well. And the third way is education. And the important thing that I want to stress about the Mosquito Habitat Mapper tool is that it supports all three of these important behaviors that promote environmental justice and protect communities from vector-borne disease. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so what I want to do now is share with you what it looks like under the hood. I'm hoping you'll do this for yourself, but basically the first screen will just tell you, where are you collecting data and when is it, where is it on the map? And that data is all automatically obtained and put into the app from sensors in your mobile device. And then you're asked to describe what habitat. And you may be surprised to find out that mosquitoes are found in a wide variety of habitats, everything from in tree holes. I was down in Tucson and we were looking at rock hole mosquitoes that find little depressions in rocks, your lakes, your ponds, any still water anywhere, your puddles. But also, they also are found in containers. And the containers are, by containers, I mean things like flower pots, old tires, toys left outside that where water will puddle for a week before the kid picks it up again. So there's a lot of different places. I visit my sister all the time in Maryland. She has a bird bath that every time I go there, it's swarming with mosquitoes. And she said, well, the birds love them, and they do, but it does cause a health hazard. Then we ask you to identify we ask if you want to count how many mosquitoes there are. And it's usually a pretty simple process to just take a look and see how many there are. And then if you're interested, we have a built-in dichotomous key where you can actually determine what if the mosquito you see is one of 5 medically important genera. And so that's also built in. And then finally, the last step, and in my mind, one of the most important steps, is it says, if this is a container habitat, can you please dump out that water? Because that promotes that one behavior that protects our communities from disease. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so this is our safety thing, and I put in here a little video of a couple mosquitoes. So if you've never seen mosquito larvae, they have a very characteristic twisty motion. So you can recognize them by how they look, sort of their general gestalt, but also how they move. But the most important thing that we wanted to tell you is that when we designed this mosquito habitat mapper, we didn't want to have people like find a mosquito, take a picture of it while it's biting you, and then potentially getting disease, because that would be dangerous. So we're having people go and find those immature aquatic larvae. They're the young mosquitoes, and they do not bite. They do not pose a health hazard. So anyway, this is a safe activity for students and library patrons and the general community to do. But of course, as we are beginning to get more and more of these mosquitoes that cause disease, and because West Nile virus is now expanding rapidly in the US, it's always great to use insect repellent, wear long sleeve shirts. And so those are a couple of really important points. Okay, next one, please. So I want to show you the impact that our citizen scientists have had. And we have a recent paper that came out in GeoHealth and talked about what the mosquito habitat mapper observations that we have obtained for the first 3 years of the project. And we're at about 33,000 observations. And of course, to really do work at a global scale, we're going to need a lot more. But, it takes a while for people to realize that this is a thing to do, and to also incorporate this into their maybe monthly schedule. But it's really super fantastic that we have 33,000 observations and 20,000 roughly breeding habitats that have been eliminated. And the important thing about citizen science, and why scientists themselves are so excited about engaging the public in science, is that we're able to produce environmental data at a volume and a velocity never before possible. And so we as citizen scientists are really contributing something that is not otherwise available. So it's really, really important. Okay, next one, please. So I just wanted to give you a couple examples of the way that the data collected by citizen scientists are being used by scientists themselves who have their own research projects. And remember that map I gave you of the different mosquitoes that are now invasive. Well, just January of this year, we had noted that there are some new mosquitoes that are coming in, and one of them is Aedes vittatus. We had the first observation of Aedes vittatus in Florida it was in fact identified by a citizen scientist. The other one it's now in Cuba. And no, I'm sorry. It was in Cuba. It is now found in Florida, and that is Aedes scophularis. Both of these are mosquitoes that can transmit vector-borne diseases. So it is really important. And so we have citizen scientists that are working with people that work with mosquitoes at the University of South Florida to try and map where those mosquitoes are found. And hopefully, if we're lucky, we can eliminate them before they become as widespread as those two ugly monsters that we talked about earlier, the yellow fever mosquito and the Asian tiger mosquito that you find now in your area. Okay. The other thing that they're doing is that, remember I talked about volume and velocity. So in order to do artificial intelligence to recognize something, using machine learning, what you need to do is you need to have literally thousands of images to train your algorithms. And so this is another thing that citizen scientists are doing. Whenever you upload a photo, it can be utilized by this team who are now developing an AI system so that maybe in a year or two, maybe probably more like 2 years, when you open up something like the mosquito habitat mapper, it'll say, oh, this is an Aedes aegypti. Do you want to report it? So we're really excited about how these technologies are coming together, and importantly, how these technologies, we're going to put them in the hands of citizen scientists. All right, that's one case study. Let's take another look at the next slide, please. And here, what we're going to talk about is harnessing the volume and velocity of citizen science and applying it to the health challenge of vector-borne disease. And this is a little close-up of that map I showed you on the first slide, but there is a new animal in town in Ethiopia, and it's called Anopheles stephensii, and it showed up just a little bit less than 2 years ago. And its original range is in the Middle East and in India. But do you remember, if you've read a lot about malaria and how we've been really successful in reducing cases of malaria because we have people like the Bill Gates Foundation, they have made bed nets available. And so this has been a powerful factor in controlling the risk of malaria in a lot of these African countries. Well, this is a big game changer, this Anopheles stephensii, because it is not only, I should say most malaria mosquitoes are rural mosquitoes. They tend to live in ditches and they tend to bite at night. But Anopheles stephensii is a very different critter altogether. It bites during the day and it lives in containers, just like those Aedes species we talked about. So bed nets don't help with Anopheles stephensii. And so we have a group of community entomologists in Ethiopia using the Globe Observer to identify locations of this dangerous, recent, invasive malaria vector. And once again, the idea is hopefully to locate it and reduce its number so it does not become as widespread as those two bad mosquitoes that you have now in your area. Okay. Third example, and I think third and last example, because we just have just a little bit of time and I don't want to take over Theresa's time, which would be so easy to do, Theresa. But next one, please. Another thing that's really important is, once again, trying to understand what's happening on the surface. So if you think about remotely sensed products from space, most, in the 1970s, they were at 250 meters. They are now down to about 30 meters. We have Sentinel products that are down to 10-meter resolution. That's getting to about the kind of resolution that mosquitoes respond to. But we are now working with the data collected by citizen scientists to get basically that 10-meter resolution on the ground, and then compare that to satellite to basically remote sensing products that are created from satellite data from space. And just on the bottom here, you can see there's a box, there's a green box, there's some red squares. And so what I did here is I took the product, the remote sensing product, and then superimposed what the citizen scientists have found. And where those red boxes are where the model is not predicting what's actually occurring on the surface. And so there is a real role for citizen scientists in the validation of these satellite products, which are used in risk modeling. And so we are working with some scientists now at the University of Florida at the Medical Entomology Lab and University of University of Nevada at Reno, trying to work on resolving this in their own predictive models. Okay, next one, please. Okay, last one. And that is that the NASA has something called the Goddard AI Center for Excellence. And we have actually 5 teams that have been funded this year that are taking the land cover data and the mosquito habitat data, and they are developing predictive algorithms so that the pictures that are the photos that are obtained by our citizen scientists can be automatically read using artificial intelligence. And that will help us to really automate and use all this data that's coming in at such a rapid rate. So there is just so much cutting edge science that's tied into the observations that citizen science make. And it's a real way to connect our public to exciting science, to NASA remote sensing, to cutting edge science like artificial intelligence, machine learning. So you can see why Theresa and I are really excited to be part of this project. Okay, next one, please. And this is just a model of sort of summarizing how you can go from a question like, how does land cover within mosquito habitats, what does it look like and how do we find it? And then you can use satellite data, you can use AI, you can use mosquito on the ground data. And then we analyze it using a bunch of different kinds of products. We compare it both visually and statistically. And then out of that, we can begin using, and this is the important part of the graph of this table here, is that, we can use this for decision-making, for risk mitigation and risk reduction. We can use this for education of the public about how to protect themselves from diseases. And we can use this all in outreach. So you can see that it's just a wonderful little package where we can reach out, scientists can use it and people can use it, the same products for different purposes. Okay, last slide, please here. And you'll see that the third poll questions, can you please show the poll, Edward? So here the question was, who is most responsible for mosquito control in your community? This was the tough question. And like myself, many people, I always thought it was the local government. I grew up in Maryland and, on Tuesday evenings, we were told to close the windows and the fogging truck would go by and get rid of the mosquitoes for us. We could have nice barbecues and things. But, particularly with these new invasive container mosquitoes, that those strategies don't work because those mosquitoes are daytime mosquitoes. So they're not out at night when we fog. And they are largely, their babies are found in containers. So the spraying doesn't really work. So the answer here is that public, people are just as responsible for local health and mosquitoes as municipal mosquito control agencies and public health departments. And I have a fun little vignette here. When I was giving a talk in the class, and he said, when I was a kid during World War II, so he's a little bit elderly, a fantastic man. And he said, when I was a kid, it was before DDT. But the only tool that we had to get rid of mosquitoes was, in fact, what we call source reduction, which is dumping out water. And so he said that during those days, when he was a kid, the big kids would go and work in the pineapple fields because all the workers were off at war. And the little kids like himself would get a whole afternoon off of school every week to go around and dump out water because malaria was a huge problem in the Asian theater and in Hawaii during World War II. And a fun fact for librarians that, our beloved Dr. Seuss got his start actually as a captain in the army during World War II. His name is Theodore Geisel. And his job was to make training films for the Army and also pamphlets. And one of the pamphlets he did was called "This is Anne, She Drinks Blood." And by Anne, he means Anopheles, the genus that carries malaria. And there is a wonderful booklet that he created with one of his character, which we now know well in our children's books, but little poems and funny little drawings that he created to raise awareness of malaria. And so things have really changed. We used to think that it was a job for just the public, but back in the 1940s and before that, it was a job for individual citizens. And the EPA just came out with the CDC in a statement this year. The public's role in eliminating potential breeding habitats for mosquitoes is critical. And so that's, I think, a really important take-home message, that if you use the mosquito habitat mapper and you do dump out water every time you make an observation, you are doing something very, very important, something that the EPA thinks is important, something that CDC thinks is important to protect your communities from disease. Okay, I think we're now ready for Theresa.
Okay, thanks, Rusty. That is a great fun fact about Dr. Seuss. If you could go to the next slide. I'm going to talk about how you can access the data that's collected by the volunteer citizen scientist. And if you go to the next slide. So Globe data is free and open access for everyone. And I've got a link here in the slide to a place that you can go where you can link to the data. The data is available very soon after it's submitted, usually within a day or two. You can actually access the data that's been submitted by citizen scientists. And privacy is an issue always. So all of the personally identifiable information associated with the observations is stripped out. So none of that is public. And we have a number of tools that'll help you to find, access, download, and use the data. If you go to this website and click on the menu for Get Data, you'll find recordings of tutorials of how to access the data. I would start with the user guide, which is a fantastic resource that'll tell you all about the data, how it's structured, the format, how to access it. And there are two built-in tools on the Globe site. There's an advanced data access tool where you can go in and access the data, download it as tabular CSV format. There's also a visualization system that you can go in to search for and visually see the data on a map. There's also an API for downloading data, filtering, downloading it in JSON and GeoJSON format. And also, you can access curated data sets. So any of the publications, Rusty had mentioned a couple that will have the reference at the end. So the publication data set used for that research and for that paper, you can access it as well. So bottom line, all open, free access for everyone. So if any of you or your researchers are interested in the data, it's easy to get to. You go to the next slide. I also wanted to mention that the journals that we've been publishing in, and because we're a NASA research project, we make sure that these are discoverable via PubMed, which I know is a resource that NLM, very important to NLM. And some things that you might think about in terms of search terms, things like citizen science, mosquitoes, climate change, are all examples of some search terms that you might consider if you're interested in this topical area. If you go to the next slide. And so I wanted to give you some examples of some of the programming and resources that we've worked with libraries to develop and to use, to pilot, to develop, and to use. And so if you go to the next slide, and the next three slides, I'm going to tell you a tale of three different library systems that we've been partnering with. And the first one is the Los Angeles Public Library, which is one of the largest and most diverse library systems in the United States. Have over 100 branch libraries. And Vivian Bird is a librarian who's the lead for what they call their neighborhood science program, where they engage their community in citizen science. There are a couple of resources there. We have a profile of Vivian on the Globe Observer website. We have a recording of a webinar that we did jointly with Vivian and StarNet Libraries. If you're not familiar with StarNet Libraries, it is an international network of libraries that are interested in STEM programming, science, technology, engineering, and math programming for the public. And they do a number of webinars, and we did one jointly with our library partners. And so one of the things that Vivian has done related to Globe Observer, she's developed, in addition to the programming they've done, they call DIY circulating kits. Now, you only need what's in the app to do the citizen science for Globe Observer, using Globe Observer app. It's nice to have a clip-on scope if you want to do the identification, but she developed kits that patrons can check out and take home that has some additional resources that are helpful. So the bulb for taking a sample, the clip-on magnifier, some information on why it's important to their community. And so you can actually go online. There's a link there that you can see what she has in her kit. Also, as part of programming in the era of COVID, like many libraries, they've had to go to online programming. They just recently started to open up their branch libraries to the public. But one of the things that they did quite a bit of during COVID over the last year and a half is online programming and a lot of family science. So the example there in the bottom right corner is a program that they did with their local mosquito control and abatement association. So they had a local subject matter expert who presented with them, and they did a story time about mosquitoes, where they read a book. They did the story time in English and in Spanish. And they had the SME actually read the kid's story. And then they ended with, well, here's what you can do about mosquitoes in our local area. So they provided something to go further to help with mosquito control in the Los Angeles area. So if you go to the next slide, the next library is a very different system. This is LaSalle Public Library that's in a very rural community in Illinois. And Donna Blomquist is a programming librarian at LaSalle Public Library. And one of the programs that's a favorite with families that they do is the Globe Mosquito Habitat Mapper. They have a partnership with a nearby nature preserve. And the bottom photo of the two boys putting stakes in the ground, they set out mosquito traps for larvae, and they went and did walks. They go back and periodically check the traps, check nearby to see if they can find larvae. They also hosted neighborhood walks where people went through and identified container mosquito habitats, and they linked it to local issues. It's a river town in LaSalle, and there are a number of unwanted habitats in debris along the river. One thing, they only need a little bit of water for a breeding habitat for mosquitoes, as small as a bottle cap. So things like litter can collect enough water for mosquitoes to breed. And so having litter cleanup to remove these unnatural habitats was something that was important to this community and to this library. So they've done a number of activities that they've paired with indoor and outdoor activities. And especially in library programming, what we've heard from our library partners, they love having this option of doing outdoor programming where there's a lot more room for social distancing. And so you can read a profile about Donna on our website. And she developed a very cool activity called Gratitude Rocks that I'd invite you to go take a look at. And she also presented on that webinar with Los Angeles Public Library and StarNet Libraries that you can take a look at, and they can hear from how she's incorporated this into their programming. And then the next slide, the third example, is the Pioneer Library System in Oklahoma. Because of COVID, they have not been able to be active in doing face-to-face programming, but they've done some really interesting things. with scientists at nearby universities, at Nazarene University and at University of Oklahoma. And you can see the scientist on the far right in the top photo there is Kaya Franca, and he's with Nazarene University. And he came over and helped with programming. So another example of looking to a university for a subject matter expert. And he's interested in the data for his science as well. So that's really nice connection. In the middle there, you see a drawing, a mural that one of the library staff drew showing the life cycle of the mosquito. So it's a nice visual that gets people's interest. And then they have a flyer saying, here's a NASA program, you can get involved. And this is on their computer lab. So they had open invitation if you wanted to schedule time and have a one-on-one or one-on-few session with the library staff to learn about how to do the observations and how to submit the data. They would schedule that. And you can see in the far right bottom, one of the librarians, Rachel Freak, working with a patron and showing how to do the observations in the computer lab, how to download the app and walk through the app. And so if you go to the next slide, we've got a wide variety of resources, activities, games, videos, tutorials, and many of these we've piloted in library programs. The games on the far left, these are designed to help practice the skills and learn some of the content related to the mosquito habitat mapper. So you see in the bottom left, build a mosquito larva trap, and that's what the LaSalle Public Library, they did in their library programming and set those traps out. They're made with recycled materials, a liter pop bottle, some netting, and very simple, easy to make, inexpensive materials. And they use that to capture some larvae. The middle figure there, it's mosquito habitat mapper tellers. So based on the fortune teller games that you play as kids, and I put those out at library conferences at ALA, and people swarmed to see these. But we have six different topics of the tellers: mosquito protection and prevention, one on Zika and dengue, malaria, West Nile virus. And there's also one, mosquito biology, and then a blank one that you can create your own teller with your own questions that you want to put in there. And then the third game on the left side is mosquito habitats and hideouts. And that's a bingo style game to learn about all of the different container breeding habitats where mosquitoes can breed. There are lots of short videos on how to do the observations. Everything's in the app. But if you're doing a program, it's nice to have these kinds of resources to reinforce and walk through visually. A resource that we've worked on with the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research is called Zika Zine. And this is a graphic novel cartoon style book that's based on actual behaviors of mosquitoes that carry Zika, and it's available in multiple languages. It's very engaging, very educational. You can download that in many different languages, but I know Spanish as well as English is one of interest to Region 3. And then we have a module called it's a Mission Mosquito Science Notebook that's for around middle-aged school kids, but as part of that, one of the set of investigations is called Mosquito Larva Hunters, and where you learn how to identify what are the characteristics for identifying the type of mosquito. So if you go to the next slide, and the links are there for the kits. Also wanted to mention we have a Mission Mosquito campaign, which provides ongoing opportunities to engage with our team. And the campaign website link is there. We have monthly webinars. The next one is tomorrow, December 9th. It's on the Story Maps Tell. And we also have recordings of past webinars that you can access. The recent one last month was on big data. The one before that was on Earth's landscape and connections to Globe Observer. On the campaign website, there are lots of short little tutorial style videos on how to use a clip-on scopes, a wide range of topics. And we have blogs, and including one that I think is really engaging called Blogging from the Field, where this summer when we had a mosquito habitat photo challenge, Rusty went looking for mosquito habitats with Anita Schiller, who is the director of the Biological Control Institute in Harris County, Texas, so in your region, Precinct 4 of that initiative. And it's a really great blog post. So we've got lots and lots of information and lots of different formats and ways to engage people in citizen science. If you go to the next slide. We also have worked with partners who've developed resources. On the left there is a Mosquito Community Investigation Guide, which is in English as well as Spanish and a number of different languages. That was developed by the Smithsonian Institute as part of their Smithsonian Science Education Center. They have an initiative related to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so this particular guide is targeted middle to high school level students, learners, and it's very flexible in terms of the modules and how it's broken out. But as part of one of the modules, they incorporated the Globe Observer Mosquito Habitat Mapper. The middle resource there, the Climate Change and Human Health Lesson Plans, was developed by the NIH National Institute for Earth Sciences. And this series of lessons are for high school, but also they have lessons appropriate for medical school students and for students in public health and health sciences as well. And so I'd invite you to take a look at those. The overarching theme of those lessons is looking at the interactions between environmental health and human health. And there's one particular segment related to our interest. It's on vector-borne diseases, and that's the part that includes the Globe Observer Mosquito Habitat Mapper. And on the right there is a neighborhood science toolkit that our friends at Los Angeles Public Library developed for librarians on doing neighborhood science and citizen science. So all of these are freely available that you can download and check out. So if you go to the next slide, we wanted to tell you about some things that are coming soon. We have data challenges throughout the year. We need observations every day, any day, but from time to time we have data challenges where we try to get lots of data over a short period. And one that's coming up, Rusty mentioned at the beginning that there are multiple tools in the app, and one of those is Globe Clouds. And there's a clouds play a very important role in our climate system, both warming and cooling. And we have a climate data challenge coming up January 15th through February 15th. And in the app, you can take observations and photos of clouds and identify the type of clouds and the amount of cloud cover. And there are two ways that you can participate: doing the observations using the app or online. You can go in and identify cloud type and other phenomena in photos that were taken by Globe observers. So we're going to have a kickoff webinar for the public. Our partners at Los Angeles Public Library are going to sponsor that on January 13th at 4 o'clock Pacific time. And we'll send out information to Debbie and Edward for your e-news so that you can, if you're interested in registering for that. And one last thing that I was going to mention, we have a new capability that's going to be coming out in 2022. A geofence is part of the app so that scientists or members of Globe who want to request data in a particular region, they can apply to have a geofence alert pop up in the app if you're in that region, to ask, if you're here, would you take some observations? So that's something that's going to be coming out in 2022. And then I think the last slide, we also wanted to issue a challenge to you. and region 3. This is from the globe visualization system where you can see all the observations, and it highlights region 3. We need lots more observations in region 3, so we really hope that you'll join us and take observations in your region. And then the last slide, I think, are the references and acknowledgements of our sponsor, the NASA Science Activation Program. So NASA is our funder for this project. And I think it's time for us to stop and see if you have any questions or comments.
Thank you, Theresa. I loved everything that you had to say, and I think that pretty comprehensive. Chandra asked a question before we get other questions. She wanted to know more about the clip-on microscope. And it's interesting because when we started this in 2017, it was really, really necessary to have this little clip-on. Now, you don't need it if you're doing all the other things, but if you want to identify whether or not you have if you want to use the dichotomous key, you need a little bit more magnification than you get with your camera. And so there are these, you can just go to your online shopping place and type in 60 power clip-on magnifier, and there are a multitude of options. And the one that we use it ranges from about $5 to $8 per one. And we have actually bought them in bulk and gotten a much better deal than that. I am happy to report I just got a iPhone 13, not because I follow all the technology, but because my really old phone finally didn't work and I couldn't hear people. But the built-in magnifier there is almost good enough that you don't need this clip-on magnifier too. So this is really, as technology gradually improves, that might become obsolete. But right now, that's a wonderful way I think that's one of the things, Theresa, they put in their kits, isn't it? Is the magnifier.
It is. That's one of the things that LA Public Library put in their DIY kits.
Thank you for the question.
And I see that, I think it was Margaret had put in a post earlier about a book about mosquitoes. And one thing I'd mentioned in the toolkit on the Globe Observer site, there's a toolkit for informal educators. We have a links to WorldCat and reading lists of books. And our friends at LA Public Library, they've done lots of reading lists on their website. I was surprised at how many different books you can find for all different ages related to the very tiny mosquitoes. So.
Looks like there's a question in the chat. Is it possible that similar citizen science work could be applied to other vectors such as ticks?
Oh, that's such a great question. And yes, there are already apps out for ticks. They are by and large, the apps that are currently available have been put out by research programs, and they don't have the educational support that we have for this particular thing. However, I will tell you, I'm working with a vector group of scientists, and the land cover tool is ideal for ticks because, people want to know, where do we find the ticks? Do we find them in the grasses? Do we find them in the tree, dropping off the trees? Do we find them in urban areas? And so there are people that are now using our app for tick surveillance too. So thank you for that question.
And I see a question from Marilyn. It came directly to me, but I think, Rusty, it's one that you would answer. She's asking, are you finding large bird nesting groups in large mosquito breeding areas and vice versa? And she did point out, as a Houston native, that she says bio, not bayou.
She says bayou?
Bio.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. That's awesome. And Chandra, yes, pikas are much cuter than mosquitoes, and they are another one of our sentinels of climate change, that's happening in our mountains. So thank you for commenting on that as well.
All right, looks like we've come up on time. But I would just like to thank both of you for such a wonderful presentation. I feel like we've all learned a lot. I think it's also worth mentioning that the GLOBE project is actually the next project to be featured in the Citizen Science Kits for Libraries from SciStarter for those libraries that are familiar with that program. So that's great. I feel like it all dovetails together. I like these topics where we can just look at like an bird's eye view of how all these things are interconnected. But thank you again so much, Rusty and Theresa. I've appreciated this.
Thanks for watching. This video was produced by the network of the National Library of Medicine. Select the circular channel icon to subscribe to our channel, or select a video thumbnail to watch another video from the channel.